When you look at all the different Bitcoin treasury companies, who is doing it right and who is doing it for the wrong intentions?
I think as an investor in treasury companies myself, I would look at it that
when the money is big enough, it's a test for all these management.
And that's effectively why you see monetary premium in the stock market, in real estate, in the bond market, where arguably things are overpriced.
What is the end game? Let's say most of the companies in the world now holds Bitcoin. Then what?
And I think that's probably where it's going because
it is such a great day because Adam is back. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Bonnie.
Today we're going to talk about something a little different. We've met twice and we've talked about the history of Bitcoin. But today we want to talk about your Bitcoin treasury company. Can you tell us your plan? What is going on right now?
Yeah, so it's Bitcoin Standard Treasury. We worked with Cantor Fitzgerald to do a series of financial raises around SPAC. The SPAC is called SIPO. That's the ticker name. Cantor Equity Partners 0. And of course, because it's a SPAC, the ticker is listed actually on the NASDAQ. And at the moment, we are in a kind of regulatory period where we wait for regulatory approval for the business combination. So the merger between the SPAC and the new company. So the new company BSTR is what is being proposed to merge with the SPAC. And so the data between the different raises is that we have 25,000 Bitcoin, so 3 billion, maybe a bit less, depending on the Bitcoin price, in the new company. Mm-hmm. And then a number of raises that came in. So the SPAC itself has 200 million, roughly. How much money follows through from the SPAC depends on proportion of redemptions, so that's uncertain. And then we did a series of raises, so a dollar equity pipe, 400 million, mm-hmm. A convertible note, 500 million, some options on top of that, so additional money there, or sort of options to do more, and a convertible preferred. So this is a bit like some of the preferred stock that MicroStrategy issued, so it's a convertible one of those. And the other thing we did, which is unique, so firstly, doing a preferred stock at the beginning is a first. MicroStrategy took some years to build up to that. Mm-hmm. They did bonds and they did convertible notes, they did the ATM, and only a few years later did they get to start introducing the preferred. We introduced the preferred during the raise process itself. And then the last thing we did, which is actually unique as far as we're aware in the US, is to do a Bitcoin basis equity pipe.
What does that mean?
So it means that normally with an equity pipe, people are committing to invest dollars. But here we had an opportunity for Bitcoiners to invest Bitcoin directly. Oh. And so they were able to, invest using Bitcoin itself actually into the process. And now the interesting thing with that is the project is primarily Bitcoin. So about 60 to 70% of the money coming in is actually already Bitcoin, because 25,000 Bitcoin in BSTR, the mm-hmm. new company, mm-hmm. 5,000 Bitcoin in an equity pipe. And if you add it up, it's something like 2/3, 60, 70% Bitcoin as opposed to US dollar raises. And on the close, which is when the regulators approve it, hopefully, perhaps in Q4 this year, then the reference price for SPAC is $10. It's the kind of market standard. And at the close, the Bitcoin investors divide the amount of Bitcoin they invested the price of Bitcoin by $10, and that's how many shares they get. So if Bitcoin price is higher, they get more shares. If it's lower, they get less shares. And so that means that when they're investing with Bitcoin, they're benefiting from the Bitcoin price movement. Mm-hmm. They're exposed to the Bitcoin price movement between the time they signed agreeing to invest and the time that they actually deliver the Bitcoin and then subsequently receive the shares.
Two questions there. First is that 25,000 Bitcoins are from founding shareholders. Mm-hmm. Is that you?
It's myself and some other investors.
Okay. You decided to put your Bitcoin to work. This is what it is. Why?
Well, actually, I'd become exposed to treasury companies some years ago when MicroStrategy started their treasury company exploration. And when it first started, they were explaining it as an inflation hedge. So they had $500 million of cash. They made a share buyback offer if anybody didn't like the treasury proposal. A lot of the money, most of the money stayed in, and then they used most of it to buy Bitcoin. And I thought that was, an interesting thing to do. And they started trying to explain how they did it to other public companies. But what I didn't expect is they didn't stop there. Then they borrowed money with corporate bonds and bought more. Later, they started issuing convertible notes to buy more, and they became really a very rapid and aggressive buyer of Bitcoin. And so with that, they sort of developed this treasury company market effectively, where people are looking at the rate of increase in Bitcoin per share. So I think they were sort of trailblazing and learning. And somewhere in that process, I thought I like the sort of what they're trying to propose to the market, that they're proposing to public companies that it could be in their financial interests as well as for individuals to consider Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. And so I thought one way to support what they're doing is if, a number of people in the Bitcoin space buy MicroStrategy shares, it'd be a form of support because, if the traditional market didn't take a positive view of Bitcoin, their price, the support for the company would be coming from the Bitcoiners. So I started buying some MicroStrategy shares. Later, I actually had the opportunity to meet with and talk with Michael and the other, at some point, Michael Saylor became the chairman and the CFO became the CEO, and they brought in a new CFO. So I had a chance to talk with the different management team, about how they saw it. And then later also, from that experience, started investing in some of the other treasury companies, Metaplanet fairly early, and the blockchain group, which is now Capital B, invested in that in a private placement last November, which was really at the beginning of their Bitcoin journey, and also in H100 and some other companies, some of the equity pipes for SPACs or RTOs, and a few more. So I kind of, learned by doing. I think it's a good way for me at least to try to understand an economic effect and a market effect and the metrics and what, how the market perceives them is to invest and trade. So that's what I did. And of course, in doing that, I developed opinions about, what could be done differently, what could be done better. And so ultimately, with some other investors, started my own treasury company, Bitcoin Standard Treasury.
When I look at strategy and what Michael Saylor is doing, it feels like he's like this master chef. He's putting different ingredients, which is different financial products, into this dish. But I don't understand how he gets it so perfectly. When you cook your dish, how do you decide what's the perfect balance of different financial products, different instruments?
Well, you can see with MicroStrategy that, they were quite transparent in explaining what they were thinking as they went. And in fact, learning from some of the things they did and adapting and trying new things to see how the market likes them. So there was some trial and error and some, trying to understand what the market wants or gaps in the market. So, for example, you can see with them moving from bonds to convertible notes, there's a kind of strategic advantage there, which is the convertible note gives you a less dilutive way to raise money because they were selling convertible notes at some time for 50% conversion premium. And so they could raise 150 million, buy Bitcoin today. And, if they converted, the company would only experience 100 million of dilution. So you can see there's a 33% advantage for dilution. So that's more effective at increasing Bitcoin per share. I think the other thing is once they have a positive MNAV above 1, they can sell shares at the market, and that will also increase Bitcoin per share. And more recently, with the perpetual products, that there's a convertible version, and some which are not convertible, so they're just paying a coupon. So in a way that that's a different formula. So I think with the preferred, it's quite interesting because they are providing a product like a financial instrument that's publicly traded that is providing an interest rate. And so it's sort of competing with a fixed income market where people are buying, perhaps US treasuries or public company bonds that pay a coupon and things like that. And ultimately, it's sort of indirectly collateralized by the Bitcoin they hold. But it's, so it's not giving, unless it's a convertible, and they do have a convertible one. The other three are not providing Bitcoin upside, but they're providing attractive interest rate return. And so it's a way for the company to access the capital market, provide an attractive financial product, interesting trade-off, ultimately, enabled by the Bitcoin balance sheet, and give the company the ability to buy more Bitcoin per share for the shareholders. So I think it's sort of transforming a risk profile. And, of course, the convertible preferred with MicroStrategy is also somewhat interesting because it has the option to convert. I think it's at $1,000 per share. And an interest rate in the meantime, of course, with some enterprise risk component, that if MicroStrategy got into difficulty, the value could fall, or the dividend might not get paid.
You said something really interesting. So you said, like, some people wonder if Bitcoin treasury companies will reduce opportunity or drive down the premium, but you said the opposite.
Well, I think it's there is an element of, some of the instruments are only available today from MicroStrategy or from MicroStrategy and one other company. And so I think if there are more, for example, preferred instruments in the market, that, it provides a sort of palette of options, where companies that are investing or individuals that are investing in these products can look at providers from different providers. And so I think you get some kind of market familiarity. You can see that with the preferreds that MicroStrategy has issued, they are sometimes a slow start because the market is getting accustomed to it, and they offer them a discount. And then once they're trading, effectively the market tells you what the implied interest rate is. And so the discount is really because it's a new product, a new type of instrument, effectively. And even though it's, it's an attractive interest rate, he would argue an attractive risk profile, they're still learning. The buyers of this are not immersed in the Bitcoin ecosystem. They don't have any particular view if Bitcoin is going up or down or sideways. And so it's a bit harder for them to understand. But I think, as they look at more products, as he's able to sell more of them, the market should get more familiar with them. And you can see that the last one that MicroStrategy issued, the STRC, or Stretch as they call it, was actually able to sell a much larger amount of that. Initially, I think 2.5 billion, which is a much larger initial sale than he was able to do with the other three.
When you look at all the different Bitcoin treasury companies and different methods to raise money, do you have a judgment, like who is doing it right and who is doing it for the wrong intentions?
I think as an investor in treasury companies myself, I would look at it that I want to feel that I understand the motivation of the management, and ultimately that you can trust them to stay on the path, right? That they're going to focus on Bitcoin. They're going to use the capital raised substantially to buy Bitcoin. They're not going to change their mind and buy something else, or keep the money and not use it to buy Bitcoin, but use it to do something else. And so, one example of that was GameStop. So GameStop entered the market, raised some capital to buy Bitcoin. I saw that offering, and decided not to invest because I didn't really trust the management because it's kind of meme stock. And my assumption is that the management is part of the formula for why it's a meme stock. So sort of meme stock, meme management, didn't trust them. And it turned out that was a good call in practice because they actually didn't use a lot of the money to buy Bitcoin. And so, of course, their investors were disappointed. And obviously, I think that was a lost opportunity for the company. But it shows that it's important to have confidence that management actually are Bitcoiners, are going to stay focused on Bitcoin, and are actually going to follow through and keep a pace going as well. I think that's another factor.
When the money is big enough, like it's a test for all these management, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing to say, but people say it's not about the money, right, with Bitcoin. And to some extent that's true because, a lot of people are actually focused on the bigger picture and the longer term positive economic and societal effects if Bitcoin continues to grow, continues to get adoption, and provides the world with a dependable store of value, where today it's actually difficult to protect value. You have to, if you just hold cash or a deposit account, you're probably going to lose money, inflation adjusted. And so you're basically pushed to take risk or to, give your money to investment managers that try to protect you. So, and that's effectively why you see monetary premium in the stock market, in real estate, in the bond market, where arguably things are overpriced for what they actually are in terms of their risk return. And so if Bitcoin eventually, catches up with gold, becomes a more established and larger store of value that people come to depend on for preserving value over the long term, preserving spending power, then I think that'll be positive. So I definitely see that in a lot of Bitcoiners, that they're really philosophically interested in that long-term outcome as a positive thing for humanity, ultimately, right? So I think you can see that Michael Saylor is quite enthusiastic. He puts a lot of energy into talking about these far future things, and a number of the other treasury companies as well.
What is the end game? Let's say most of the companies in the world now holds Bitcoin. Then what?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably where it's going, because effectively, as I've said, Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, which for people who are familiar with like hedge fund investments, they are compensated with a management fee and then a success fee or a carry, which is that they get a percentage of the investment return. And now they'll also do a hurdle rate, which is they won't, if you can achieve 4% in a treasury bond and they achieve 4%, they won't charge you anything, because you feel like you shouldn't get charged for that baseline, easy to achieve rate. So that's the hurdle rate. And so by saying that Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, you're basically saying if you look at all investments compared to Bitcoin, there's basically nothing that beat Bitcoin in the last decade, right? Over any kind of long-term period. And so really, the only way for a company or anybody to outperform Bitcoin is to join Bitcoin. To match it, you buy it. To outperform it, you buy it inside a company and you try to find ways to increase the Bitcoin per share. And so effectively, you could see a path where most companies have their treasury in Bitcoin, and then they're operating their core business using excess profits rather than to pay dividends or buy back shares, to increase the Bitcoin per share, and use some capital to expand their business, expand their products and services, and so forth. So I think that could be coming in the future, and it's very compatible with Bitcoin becoming a long-term store of value, that it would make sense that companies are also using that phenomenon.
I was talking to a gentleman here yesterday. He is in the Bitcoin mining space, and we compared the revenue of Bitcoin mining companies versus Bitcoin treasury companies. And well, the conclusion is it is easier to go the second route. Well, if a lot of Bitcoin mining companies do that, how does that affect Bitcoin network?
The mining is a kind of commodity activity. So if there's less hash rate because people are buying Bitcoin instead of mining, it will make mining more profitable. So it's sort
Right.
of self-correcting. If mining becomes more profitable, then they'll come back, or new entrants will enter the mining space.
Okay. There's a favorite movie of yours. In The Matrix, Neo wakes up and discovers that the system he thought was the reality is actually a trap. And Sailor quoted that and said, "Tickets to escape the Matrix are priced in Bitcoin."
Nice quote.
Yeah. What are we escaping? And is it possible that one day we wake up and realize there's another red pill waiting for us?
With Bitcoin, it tends to have not just a kind of passive, investment aspect, but to change people's perspective to a longer time frame in this kind of long time preference concept. Because ultimately, if you have a savings technology which has historically been very effective, it sort of incentivizes you to be less consumerist and to save, because if you save $1 today, maybe it will become $10 or $100 in the future. And actually, within some period of time, I think many people find themselves redenominating their unit of account for their savings in Bitcoin. So it's not, well, how many dollars have I saved this year? How's my savings portfolio going in dollar terms, but how is it going in Bitcoin terms? And so that becomes I think actually a very good incentive for people to think about the long term, because then they start planning for the longer term, start thinking longer term. So they're not trapped in the moment in the 9-to-5 job. They're thinking about the future generation, families, and society ultimately. So I think it's a healthier incentive background.
In, let's say, 1,000 years, people look back and they see Adam back. How do you want to be remembered?
I like a mission, a positive mission. So before Bitcoin, I was interested in the cypherpunks ideas, which are very Bitcoin compatible ideas. So I'm kind of a long-term mission focused person. So actually it's not about the money, it's about a mission. And so, I hope the mission gets to its full potential.
What exactly is the mission?
Well, I think the mission is sort of about self-sovereignty and more empowerment of the individual. And ultimately, a book I like, apart from the Matrix on the film side of things, is Snow Crash, which is sort of projecting the far future, where there's a much more free market environment in society, and governments are largely forgotten leftovers from the previous era.
We love you. Everybody loves you. Thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Please come back soon.
All right.